Good morning. It was about 10 years ago now. Marsh and I went down to Norman to go have lunch with some good friends of ours, Jim and Jerry Anderson. Jim was now in his mid-80s, wasn't in really good health, wasn't able to get out a whole lot, and so we went down to go see them, and we had a wonderful lunch together. When we got through, Jim wanted to take me into a little library, and he said, "I got something I want to show you." And we walked in, and there he picked up this crystal award. And he just held it for a second. He said, "Bob, do you know what May the 8th is?" I thought about it for a little bit, and then I said, "May the 8th. That's Victory in Europe Day." He was surprised that I knew, and he said, "You're absolutely right." He said, "This was the 65th anniversary, and I received this award. I took this crystal award that he had, and I read it. It was on it. It said, James K. Anderson, Patton's 3rd Army, 319th Regiment, 65th Anniversary, VE Day, our hero now and forever." Then it listed all the names of his family on it, and they were the ones who had given him this award, our hero now and forever. Jim had lived a very fascinating life. It turned out that when he was just a young man, he was in military school out in New Mexico. And there in New Mexico, he was going to military school, planning on being an officer in the Army, and then World War II broke out. Pearl Harbor was bombed. And he was now afraid that the war was going to get over before he ever got into the war. And so he decided to go and enlist. They didn't take him as an officer. No, he got to sign up as a private. And he was put into Patton's Army. He was a forward scout. He would be into the thickest of fighting. He would ultimately be a part of the Battle of the Bulge. When he got over and he began the fighting there with Patton, it became clear to him he was not going to survive. He knew that he was going to die fighting this war. So whenever there came a dangerous assignment, he just volunteered because he knew he was going to die sooner or later. But as he went through the war, there would be a step here or a turn there. In a moment when he almost died, he didn't. He had several men who stepped in and saved his life 3 different times. Now, he lived through the most difficult and brutal fighting through the thickest of World War II. And then it came. Patton's army was moving through Austria. They were on their way to Steiger. And as they were on their way to Steiger, you come to the Enns River. And the Russians were coming the other direction. They had just gotten to the Enns River before them and had gone into the river. And suddenly here came the Americans. The Americans and the Russians met there at the Enns River outside of Steiger, Austria. And if they had met, that meant that everything was liberated. The war was over. And so the Americans went rushing into the river along with the Russians, and they were splashing and playing. The Americans didn't know Russian. The Russians didn't know English. It didn't matter. Everyone was having such a good time. He said they were liberated. And that year, May the 8th, 1945, he said he liberated a bottle of French champagne. And he made a commitment that day that every year on May the 8th, for the rest of his life, he was going to have good French champagne. And he was going to take the time to remember his friends and the men he had fought with and those who had died and those who had saved his life. And he was going to take time to give God thanks for the gift of his life. And Jim lived such an interesting life. There were times that it was up and times that it was down. Because when he came back home to the United States, he got into the oil business. He was a wildcatter back in those days. And as you can imagine what life is like as a wildcatter in those days in the 50s and 60s. And there were good times and there were not so good times. That was professionally up and down, but personally. He came home, got married, had 3 wonderful children, and then they got divorced, and there was such pain. And then he found a lady that he had known before the war, and they began to date, and they fell in love and got married, and life was so good for 7 years, and then she developed cancer, and she passed away. He then met Jerry, and Jerry was his perfect soulmate. And he and Jerry would be married for years, and their families would be blended and the best of friends. No, Jim knew what it was to have good times and hard times. But he said, it doesn't matter. Every year on May the 8th, I stop and I give God thanks for life. And I remember that I am blessed. And I remember those friends that I've had who went before me. He had done it for 65 years. In the end, he would do it for 71 years before Jim passed away. This May the 8th, a week from today, today's Friday, May the 1st, well, next Friday, May the 8th, it'll be the 75th anniversary of VE Day, Victory in Europe Day, when the war in Europe was over. And I think it's an important time for us to remember. Remember people like Jim, and to remember all those other people who served and who gave their lives, and everybody who sacrificed so that we could be free. So on a week from today, we're going to have a special concert down here at the church with our carillon. Robert Faisal is going to be playing all of those bells up on our carillon. It will be a drive-in concert. You come, you'll be out in the parking lots, you'll stay in your cars, but we'll be together at the church, the downtown campus, and be able to have a time of remembering, giving God thanks, and being able to celebrate. We're also going to do that this Sunday in worship. I hope you'll be online with us this Sunday, because as a part of our worship service, we again want to give God thanks. We want to remember people like Jim Anderson and so many others, so many who are members of this family of faith, who are just incredible people who all sacrificed so that you and I can be free. There's something important about taking time to remember and to give thanks. I hope you do it today, and I hope you do it all of next week.